Before we move on to the product details page, I want to squeeze in a quick lesson to talk about making an entire page responsive and how to deal with different breakpoints. So we already have a couple responsive components within this page. We have the header nav and the footer, which are both responsive. But that doesn't mean that this page is responsive. So let's just take a look at what happens if we increase the width of this page. Definitely not what we want. So let's fix that. The first thing I noticed is that even though these are responsive, they're not actually filling the container and adapting to the screen width. And that's because they're set at fixed when it comes to resizing. And we want to be able to set that to fill container. But we can't do that unless we turn on auto layout for this entire page. So we are going to do that. But first, let's frame together some of this content to make sure that we can adapt everything appropriately. So I'm going to frame together these two elements here, these elements here. We already have this as a frame and this as a frame, so that's great. But I'm also going to frame these together. Now let's turn on auto layout. So what we've already seen when we turn on auto layout is that it's gonna automatically hug these contents. So let's first turn on fill container for this and for the footer. So far, so good. Now we want to do the same for the rest of the elements, but we're going to have to make some adjustments. For example, this frame here, we want to turn on fill container, but we also want this rectangle with an image fill to be able to fill the container as well. So we're going to change it to scale. Okay, this is actually working pretty well. Let's turn on auto layout for this. So now that I'm looking at this, I actually feel like we need to ungroup these and organize them a bit differently. So I'm going to ungroup this as well. And I'm actually going to group this showing 112 products with this here by doing frame selection. And we definitely don't need that big of a gap. Let's just give it 40 pixels. And there we have that. Move it to the side for now. And then we'll frame these together. Turn on auto layout and align them horizontally. Since we want this reset filters to be all the way on the right and for these to be a bit closer to each other, I'm going to frame these together as well. Turn on auto layout, make sure that the text is aligned with the center of this button and give it 40 pixels, maybe even 24. That should be good. And then we want auto spacing here, because we want to fill the container with this element here. And then we'll frame these together as well and give them 40 pixels. So now, so that you can see what we have and how we kind of want to display it, this is what we're working with here. So now let's frame these two things together and put them in this layout by hitting Command X and Command V to paste inside. Okay, so we're getting close, but we're not quite there yet. So this frame here is the one that houses all of this content inside, and we definitely want to give it some padding. So let's give it 45 pixels on each side since that's what we've been using. And we also want to give it a nice gap for some breathing room. So 40 pixels should be good, maybe even 64 for a bit more breathing room. And then so that these two text boxes align, I want to give this section on the left a little bit of top padding. So to figure out how much top padding we need, we just need to, in here, measure the distance from the top of the text box to the top edge of this frame, and that's 12 pixels. So I'm going to come in here and give this 12 pixels of top padding. And this way, these line up perfectly. Okay, looking good so far. Now, let's see what happens when we resize. Pretty good, but not exactly what we want. So we need to turn on fill container for this section here. But of course, that is not exactly what we want. So since we have this wrap function on for auto layout, we should be able to make it so that as this page increases in width, these rows increase as well. So to do that, we need to come into this section here and switch it from hug to fill container. This way, whenever we resize this page, this section stays stagnant, but this section is more responsive. The last thing I'm going to do is just give the header a little bit of breathing room since it's really kind of squished to the top. So I'm just going to select on the frame as a whole, go into the top padding and give it 16 pixels. So as you can see, this layout works really well for certain breakpoints, but it definitely isn't kind of like a one-size-fits-all situation. So I just want to point out that sometimes you may have to design different layouts for different breakpoints. Later in this course, we're going to be designing a page specifically for mobile, but sometimes when I'm working on web design projects, I'll also have to design a specific layout for a tablet screen. This 2-up grid is probably the smallest that I would recommend going for this layout before it starts to not make much sense. So what I might do is try out some common breakpoints and see when it starts to not look so good on the layout, and make note of that for the developer and potentially design another layout of what it could look like on tablet portrait mode so that the design makes sense and these buttons don't start running into each other, for example. I could see us doing a layout for tablet portrait, for example, where these buttons aren't quite so long, and so it gives more room for a 2-up grid here. All that said, in Figma, making something responsive is a bit of an iterative process, and I'm always clicking into different frames and changing things up to make sure that I really have the auto layout dialed in so that it does what I want it to do when I resize the screen. But it's not always going to be a one-size-fits-all. You may have to design for different breakpoints. Now, in the next lesson, let's tackle the product details page.